I never imagined that my own death would be the most vivid moment of my existence. For 7 minutes, my heart stopped beating. For 7 minutes, I left this world and entered a reality that human words cannot fully describe. But the most surprising thing wasn't just experiencing death. The most incredible part was meeting Jesus and hearing something from him that changed everything I thought about my life. My name is Sarah Davis. I'm 34 years old and a hairdresser. I had always believed in God since I was little. My mother took me to church, and I grew up hearing stories about Jesus, praying, reading the Bible, and singing hymns. Yet, deep down, something bothered me. I never felt that God spoke to me. I saw other people weeping, having profound experiences with him, and receiving answers to their prayers, but for me, there was always silence. Over time, I began to think that perhaps I wasn't worthy, or that maybe God only spoke to a chosen few and I simply wasn't one of them. I wanted to believe, but deep inside, I carried a painful doubt. Does he really hear me? While my faith wavered, my life moved at a frantic pace. The beauty salon where I worked demanded so much of me, hours on my feet, demanding clients, tight deadlines. On top of that, daily worries consumed me, bills to pay, a struggling relationship, and a constant fear of the future. My mind never stopped. I would wake up anxious and go to sleep with a heavy heart. Even in church, my mind was always restless. I would pray, only to find myself immediately thinking about the next day's problems. I tried to hear God's voice, but all I could hear was the noise of my own anxiety. That's how things were until that day. It was an ordinary afternoon at the salon. The air was thick with the smell of hair dye and hairspray. The blow-dryer roared, and conversations blended into a constant buzz. I was finishing up highlights for a client when I suddenly felt something strange, a pressure in my chest. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just fatigue, but within seconds, the pain intensified and spread down my arm. My body went cold, and a wave of dizziness made me grab the counter to keep from falling. The room started spinning, and someone shouted my name. Then everything went dark. That was the moment my near-death experience began. I had always imagined death to be dark, lonely, and terrifying, but what happened to me was completely different. The instant my heart stopped, time ceased to exist. It was as if I had been torn from the reality I had always known and thrust into something far greater. I remember the pain in my chest, the room spinning around me, and muffled voices calling my name. Then came absolute silence, not an ordinary silence, but a total absence of sound, as if the entire world had been switched off. Then, something happened that I will never forget. I saw myself. Yes, I was there, yet I wasn't. It was as if there were two versions of me. My body lay on the floor, and people were rushing about in a panic, someone screaming for help, another touching my face, trying to wake me. But the strangest part was that I felt none of it, no pain, no anguish. On the contrary, there was an indescribable peace, as if every worry in my life had simply vanished. I floated gently above the scene. I was light, so light that it felt as though the air itself was holding me up. I looked at my hands and realized they were different. I wasn't made of flesh and bone as before. I was made of something translucent, something I cannot describe, yet I existed. That was when I realized I was dead. The shock of this realization lasted only an instant. There was no fear, only a sense of absolute clarity. Suddenly, all the worries that had tormented me, work, bills, fears, anxiety, seemed so small, so insignificant. It was as if, for the first time in my life, my mind was completely free, and that was when something even stranger happened. Like an invisible magnet, I was drawn upward. The scene in the hall began to fade, as if being swallowed by an intense light. This light enveloped me, embraced me. It was warm but did not burn, brilliant but did not hurt my eyes. Then, I saw something begin to form before me. At first, it was just a glow, a presence, but little by little, that presence took shape. My heart, or whatever I possessed at that moment, raced. I knew who stood before me. I had always heard of him, read about him, sung about him, and tried to speak to him so many times, and now, there he was, Jesus. He looked at me as no one had ever looked at me before, a gaze that pierced right through me, seeing everything I was, everything I felt, and for the first time in my entire life, I knew. He had always been there. He had always heard me. Then he smiled. I will never forget that look. There was something in Jesus's eyes that no words can describe. It was as if he saw the whole of me, every pain I had carried, every tear I had shed, every fear I had never confessed to anyone. Yet, at the same time, there was such profound love there, a love that said, I have always been here. In that instant, everything around me vanished. There was no more space or time. There was only him. Jesus stood before me, enveloped in a light that was not merely brightness, but life itself. His robes were so white they seemed made of pure light. His face was not like the paintings we see in churches. He was real, alive, and his presence radiated a peace I had never experienced before. I wanted to speak but couldn't. My words made no. Standing before him, I simply gazed at him, and he looked back at me as if waiting for me to feel before I understood. Then he reached out his hand to me. The moment his fingers touched mine, I was enveloped by an indescribable sensation. It was as if a current of pure love coursed through my entire being, a love that filled me completely, dissolving every last trace of the anguish I had been carrying. That was when I realized I was no longer in the same place. What I saw around me was impossible to describe in human words. Heaven was not as I had imagined. It wasn't just clouds and angels playing harps. It was alive, a place that breathed and glowed in a way that didn't hurt the eyes, but rather stirred the heart with its overwhelming beauty. There were colors I had never seen before and a soft melody that didn't come from any instrument but seemed to pulse within the very air. The whole of heaven seemed to vibrate with a love that was almost tangible. Jesus began to walk, and I followed. He didn't need to speak for me to understand that he wanted to show me something. I looked around and saw people, so many people. They were radiant, as if clothed in light. Some were running, others laughing, and some were embracing one another. There was a genuine joy there, a joy so pure that just looking at it brought tears to my eyes. Then I saw something that gave me goosebumps all over, a massive table, not just any table, but one that stretched on endlessly. Upon it were goblets, bread, and wine, a great banquet prepared. Jesus noticed my gaze and smiled. Everything is ready, we are just waiting for the guests. I didn't know what to say. Then he turned to me and spoke words I would never forget. You always wanted to hear me, but your heart was too full of worries. How can I speak if you do not quiet yourself to listen? His words struck me, a gentle yet profound blow. I wanted to answer, to say that I had tried, that I had always sought his voice, but in that instant, I understood something I had never realized before. It wasn't that God wasn't speaking to me, it was that I didn't know how to listen, and that was when Jesus showed me something that would change my life forever. If this story is touching you in some way, know that you aren't here by accident. Subscribe so you don't miss future videos, and keep your heart open to what comes next. Jesus's gaze remained fixed on me, and in that moment, I felt that nothing else mattered. No time, no worries, not even questions, only him and the truth he was about to reveal. Sarah, he said, in a voice that seemed to touch my very soul, you always wanted to hear me, but to hear the voice of God, you must learn to quiet your heart. In that moment, everything made sense. For years, I had prayed for answers, cried out for signs, and asked God why he spoke to so many people but never to me. And now, standing before Jesus himself, I understood. My heart had never been quiet enough to listen. It was like a room full of voices, all speaking at once. Fear of the future, bills to pay, insecurities, comparisons, the pain of the past. And amidst all that noise, how could I possibly perceive the gentle voice of God? Jesus raised his hand, and suddenly I saw scenes from my own life unfolding before me, as if an invisible screen had opened in the sky. Images began to appear. I saw little Sarah, just 7 years old, sitting in church beside my mother, hearing about God and longing to feel him. I saw the teenage Sarah crying alone in the room, asking God to help her be accepted by others. I saw the adult Sarah, exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to carry the world on her shoulders while wondering why she never felt his presence. And then another scene appeared. I saw myself sitting at the table reading the Bible, yet with my phone nearby, my mind distracted, my heart restless. I saw my own hurried prayers, offered amidst the rush of daily life. I saw every moment God tried to speak to me, but I didn't notice because my mind was always too busy. I felt a deep ache, not because Jesus was rebuking me, but because I realized how far I had drifted from him without even noticing. I have always been here, he continued. But you need to learn to trust. You worry about so many things, yet there is something you forget. The Father is already taking care of you. Then he said something that touched my heart in a way I will never forget. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Matthew 6:34. Those words entered me like fire. This was it. This was the answer I had always sought. I had spent my life trying to hear God, yet I was always too worried about the future, always carrying anxieties that were not mine to bear. Then Jesus extended his hand again, and I saw something that sent a shiver to the very core of my soul. A vast multitude, people of all ages, from every corner of the globe. They were looking at me. Some were weeping, while others smiled. I saw outstretched hands. I saw hearts. You need to go back, he said tenderly. My heart ached. I didn't want to leave. How could anyone wish to depart from such a place? How could I return to a world where everything is so confusing, so heavy, so difficult? They need to know. Jesus looked at me with such compassion that my soul trembled. Many of my children live just as you did, lost in their own worries, believing I am far away when, in truth, I have always been near. They need to know that I love them, that I care for them, and that I speak to them, but they must learn to listen. Tears filled my eyes. I knew what this meant. I had to go back. The mere thought of leaving that place, of moving away from Jesus' presence, tore me apart inside. It was as if my very being knew that this was my true home, that everything I had ever sought, without even realizing it, was right there. I am with you, Jesus said, his gaze piercing my soul. Always, before I could answer, an irresistible force pulled me backward. It was as if I were being sucked away, as if my essence were returning to its source. The heavens began to recede. The radiance, the peace, and the love that enveloped me all began to dissolve. I tried to fight, tried to hold on, but there was no resisting it. And then came the darkness. A crushing weight took hold of me. The gentle warmth of heaven was replaced by a terrible cold. My soul felt as though it were being squeezed into something small and tight, until suddenly, like an electric shock, my body convulsed violently. I was back. My eyes struggled to open. Air rushed into my lungs as if I had been drowning and had just broken the surface. I felt pain in my chest and heard the beeping of machines and agitated voices around me. She's back, someone shouted, and soon I saw surprised faces, doctors, nurses, my family. My mother was there, holding my hand, with tears streaming down my face. I tried to speak, but my throat felt constricted. My body was heavy and weary. It was as if I were a stranger inside my own self. Everything felt wrong. The white hospital ceiling, the cold, flickering light, the smell of alcohol and medicine. I wanted to weep because nothing that compared to the place I had come from. I had been in heaven, I had been with Jesus, and now I was back on earth. The days that followed were a blur. The doctors spoke of a miracle. They said I had been without life for minutes, yet my brain had suffered no damage. There was no scientific explanation for my recovery. I knew the truth, but how could I explain something like that? Where would I begin? How could I describe in human words something far greater than anything I had ever experienced? I tried to tell my family, but I saw fear in my mother's eyes, shock on my brother's face, and skepticism from the doctors. Some called it delirium, some said it was my dying brain creating hallucinations, but I knew better, because what I had lived through was neither a dream nor a trick of the mind. What I had lived through was more real than this life, and something burned within me. I had a mission. Jesus had sent me back with a message. He showed me that thousands of people were living as I once had, trapped in anxiety, consumed by fear, unable to hear God's voice. But how could I speak? Who would believe me? I felt as though I held a treasure in my hands, a profound secret that could change lives, but what if they called me crazy? What if they rejected me? That was when I remembered what Jesus had told me, "I am with you always." I took a deep breath. I knew what I had to do. Life was never the same after the moment I returned. I felt that something inside me had changed forever. It was as if a veil had been torn away before my eyes. Everything that had once seemed important, worries, anxieties, the daily rush, now seemed. It felt so small compared to the magnitude of what I had experienced, yet I was still human. The first few days of adjustment were hard. I found myself gazing at the sky, longing to go back. The world around me seemed heavier, denser, people rushed about, trapped in their own bubbles of worry. I wanted to shout, "Don't you understand? God is so close, why won't you listen?" But I held back. I remembered the crowd Jesus had shown me. They didn't just need my words, they needed to see the transformation in my life. That's when it all began. My routine changed completely. Before, my prayers had been rushed and automatic. Now, I spoke to God as if He were sitting right beside me, because He was. Before, I read the Bible out of religious obligation. Now, every word burned in my heart. The verse Jesus gave me, Matthew 6:34, became my motto. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. I had never understood that verse the way I did then. God didn't want me to carry the weight of tomorrow. He was already there. I began to truly trust. The anxiety that once dominated my life started to lose its grip. Whenever a fearful thought arose, I remembered Jesus' voice saying, "I am with you always," and something incredible happened. The more I trusted, the more I heard, not in an audible voice or extraordinary visions, but in the peace that filled my heart when I surrendered everything to Him, and in the whisper of the Holy Spirit guiding me in small decisions. For the first time, I truly heard God, and then, I began to speak. At first, it was difficult. I feared judgment and what people might think, but something inside me was burning. I couldn't keep this experience to myself anymore. I started sharing my story at the beauty salon where I worked. My clients began to notice the difference. "Sarah, you're different. What happened?" I would smile and reply, "Do you have a moment? I need to tell you something that changed my life." And there, amidst hair dyes and scissors, I began to share the gospel. Some listened with tears in their, some looked on with doubt, others felt uncomfortable, but I didn't care anymore. I just needed to plant the seed because I understood my mission. I am no longer the same woman. The Sarah who died in that salon is not the one living today. I live each day with a purpose, to remind people that God is not distant, that He speaks, but we must learn to listen. And if there is one thing I want to leave with you, you who have made it this far, it is this: stop, quiet your heart, and trust. God is closer than you imagine. And if this story touched you in some way, if something stirred within your heart while I was speaking, do not ignore it, because perhaps, just perhaps, this message reached you for a reason. Thank you for watching this far. If this story spoke to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and remember, God is speaking. Are you listening?